Good morning, students. Today, let us start with our first chapter in English literature. Our course book is New Images by Pearson. And our first chapter in English literature is Mr. Toad's Adventure. This is an excerpt taken from The Wind in the Willows, which was written by Kenneth Grahame, who was a Scottish writer, and his famous work was The Wind in the Willows, published in 1908. He was born in Edinburgh, Scotland, and he spent most of his childhood living with his siblings and his grandmother, and he wrote various essays and children's stories, and his stories for children capture the essence of childhood. As I told you, Mr. Toad's Adventure is an excerpt taken from The Wind in the Willows. Now, you know what is a toad? A toad is a big frog. So, in this story, Mr. Toad has the greatest desire of having adventures in his life. Right? So, one bright summer morning, Mr. Toad was walking fast along the road, and he came to a small town and he was feeling hungry. So he walked into an inn and ordered the best lunch for himself and sat down to eat in the coffee room. And as he was having his meal, he heard the sound of a car. And the car came nearer and nearer, and it could be heard turning into the inn yard and coming to a stop. Now the party which was driving the car entered the coffee room, and they were hungry, they were talkative, and they were praising the car that they had brought along with them. So Mr. Toad was hearing very quietly, and he listened eagerly to their conversation for a time, but he couldn't wait, and at last he could not keep on listening to their conversation, so he slipped out of the room quietly, and as soon as he got outside, he pulled the car out of the inn yard and drove it away in great speed. As you know, he was very fond of cars, so he quietly came out of the inn, sat in the car and drove it out in great speed. Now, he was neither conscious that he had done something wrong nor aware of where he was heading. He was not thinking of the consequences. He just sat into the car and drove it out. Now, when he heard the police siren, he increased the speed of the car even more and tried to escape. But he was caught at the next turn of the road. Now, when Mr. Toad was caught, he became arrogant, and he told the traffic police that he did not need any license. When the police asked him for the license, he said he did not need any license. And he also started telling lies by saying that he had only been trying to check the speed limit of the car, and that is why he was driving so fast. Now, he was caught by the police and he was presented before a law court. Now, Mr. Clark was a member of the court of law. He thought that Mr. Toad had committed 3 very serious crimes, and those were stealing a motor car, driving dangerously, and being arrogant and cheating the police. He thought Mr. Toad should be given 20 years of imprisonment for these crimes. So, finally, Mr. Toad was punished. He was given the imprisonment, and he was put in chains and dragged through the marketplace where people attacked him with carrots. And after he entered the old prison house, he saw soldiers making fun of him and also looking at him threateningly. And he went through the thumbscrew room and finally reached the remotest dungeon. Dungeon is the underground prison in a castle. which is far away in a remote place. And here he was handed over to the jailer who put him inside the cell. So this was the end of the story, where Mr. Toad began with his love for driving and he landed up in a very serious problem where he was put into the prison. So this is the story. Now we'll try to solve question answers also based on the story. Like first we can do true and false. Suppose I make a statement that Mr. Toad was startled by the sound of a truck. Then this is false because he heard the sound of a car. Now second is Mr. Toad didn't want to steal the car. This is true. He didn't want to steal the car. He just drove the car because he had a passion for cars and he had a passion for adventures also in his life. Mr. Toad broke the traffic rules. Yes, this is true. Mr. Toad was let go because he was a wealthy merchant. This is false. Mr. Toad was a helpless prisoner in a remotest dungeon. True. Now, there can be some more questions based on this story. What was Mr. Toad doing when he heard the sound of the car? So, Mr. Toad was having his lunch in the coffee room of an inn when he heard the sound of the car. Second question can be, describe Mr. Toad's adventure after he picked the car from the inn yard till he was caught. So, Mr. Toad pulled the car out of the inn yard and drove away in great speed. He was neither conscious that he had done something wrong nor aware of where he was heading. When he heard the police siren, he increased the speed of the car and tried to escape, but he was caught in the next turn of the road. Third question is, how did Mr. Toad behave when he was caught by the traffic police? Mr. Toad was arrogant and told the traffic police that he did not need any license. He also lied by saying that he had only been trying to check the speed limit of the car. Next question, who was Mr. Clerk? What was his opinion on the crime committed by Mr. Toad? Mr. Clerk was a member of the court of law. He thought that Mr. Toad had committed 3 very serious crimes: stealing a motor car, driving dangerously, and cheating the police. He thought Mr. Toad should get 20 years of imprisonment for these crimes. Next question. Describe the journey of Mr. Toad from the courthouse to the dungeon where he was imprisoned. Answer would be, Mr. Toad was put in chains and dragged through the marketplace where people attacked him with carrots. After he entered the old prison house, he saw soldiers making fun of him and also looking at him in a threatening manner. He went through the thumbscrew room and finally reached the remotest dungeon. Remotest dungeon meaning an underground prison in a castle far away. Here he was handed over to the jailer who put him inside the cell. So this is the answer. Suppose we can answer some more questions like, why do you think Mr. Toad was consumed by the desire to drive the vehicle despite knowing that it didn't belong to him? Now, Mr. Toad was consumed by the desire to drive the vehicle despite knowing that it didn't belong to him because he had a passion for driving and he was very fond of cars, and it was this passion which he could not control, and when he saw the car, his sense of right or wrong left him. He lost his sense of morality and he picked up the car despite knowing that it didn't belong to him and he should not be driving it without the license and without anybody's permission. This is a question answer session based on this chapter. A worksheet will be following this chapter try to write down the answers which we have already discussed based on the chapter, and the solved answers will also of the earlier sessions are also there in the PDF. So earlier worksheets you must have done. Check your answers from the PDF which will be having the solved answers of the earlier two worksheets. That's all for today. Thank you.